But first a poem written by Christina Rossetti to set the tone. Remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go yet turning stay. Remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. Only remember me, you understand. It will be late to cancel then or pray, yet if you should forget me for a while, and afterwards remember, do not grieve, for if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that once I had, better by far you should forget and smile, than that you should remember and be sad. Obviously, spoilers ahead, and I urge you to read the manga if you have not already, but steer clear for now if you suffer from external media negatively affecting you easily, as this one will shoot your soul with an astral forged shotgun nearly every chapter. I'm thankful and equally devastated that I read Goodnight Punpun, as this masterpiece truly gave me a glance into the life of a very troubled individual and the tenebrosity of human nature. This video will be a central review to the character and story of Aiko, therefore skipping significant story beats that shape the plot and overall message, so apologies if the chronology seems to jump forward sporadically. The tale of Punpun on Adira is one wrought with tragic loss, destructive domestic environments, and overall a soul-crushing tendency to feel empty and suicidal. No manga has ever hit me the same way Goodnight Punpun did. I have never cried as painfully as I do each time I even scan the emotional panels, which is most of them, as nearly every character in their own sense is a horrendous result of life's constant battery, unfair conditions, and depressive lack of volition. However, despite the severity of Punpun's conditions, he himself has never been the most tragic character of the story, in my opinion, for reasons I shall explain later on. Aiko Tanaka, despite her forename roughly translating to little loved one in Japanese, I meaning love and ko meaning child, is the pinnacle of silent suffering within the story, and her character resonated with me the most in terms of empathy and a gut-wrenching feeling every time she was mentioned, pictured or remembered as they grew up that had me looking like Levi after the Thunder Spear explosion. The central relationship of the story is introduced in the very first chapter with the arrival of Aiko, and from this incredibly important moment, the life of Punpun enters a completely new trajectory, with much of the story surrounding how he progresses through life, with the constant suffocation from family struggles and mental health, along with the dangers of idealization and romanticization of relationships. This is something that indirectly dooms Aiko as well, however, as children tend to not possess realistic visions of the future or relationships. This can lead to dangerous consequences, as it does with this pair, as Punpun falls deeply in love from the very first sight of her. Later on, they walk home from school together and she bewitches him with her intelligent and outgoing personality that contrasts his own naive and nervous one, and leaves him admiring how magnificent she is. A little further on, Punpun and Aiko are walking through the sports hall, and this is where we see the first blossom of their long romantic relationship, as Punpun bravely announces that even if he cannot stop global extinction, he will always protect Aiko because he loves her. Flashing images of pop culture, global circumstances, and differing culture play through his head, but none of that even matters to him, as Aiko was all he wanted to protect. Whilst reading it for the first time, it was no more than a sweet moment, even in the sad context of their life, but as someone with reading experience now, this is made even more tragic as the fate of their relationship is ultimately horrific, as Punpun destroys everything he swore to hold dear. Their first kiss is followed up by a wholesome yet unnerved moment between them in the hospital wing, and we see more of Aiko's wish to leave her life, with Punpun clearly becoming her hyperfixation on achieving that. Claiming that everyone else can die for all she cares as long as she has Punpun is not only a worrying thing to say, as it shows her obsessiveness on Punpun, someone she barely knows, but also establishes her character as desolate to not have anyone else to rely on. I saw a lot of the comments attacking her as some sort of psychopath Makima model, and that truly never felt right to me, as I see it more as a bleak effort to reach out to a better life. She's just a kid who knows nothing but is desperate to escape her pain. Aiko does say odd things sometimes, but I never felt any malice charged in what she says, only pain. Asano is a master at drawing foreshadowing pieces, and this bed scene is reflected in the future in an even more devastating fashion, which we will explore later on. But for now, the scene is meant to capture two kids growing up and entering a world in which they know little of, being crushes, relationships, and childhood romance. This is something most of us experienced, and I absolutely felt an incorporeal nostalgia whilst reading the more happy parts of Punpun's childhood adventures. One reason Asano may have done this is to help destroy us further on in the manga, making his story pierce our soul ever more brutally to punish us for letting our guard down surrounding the niceties. And it absolutely worked. During her childhood and early adulthood, Aiko lives in a part of a cult-like organization called the Cosmos Health Center, in which they attempt to sell purifying water to people whom they perceive as corrupted or unhappy with life. We see her stepmother peddle the mystically imbued product to Punpun's uncle, who understandably becomes enraged by Mitsuko's pretentious business approach. Aiko is present but silent, something she is familiar with in life, and observes as Mitsuko's personality becomes more erratic and concerning. This facade of Aiko's stepmother being a healthy person is one steeped in doubt from as early as chapter 10, as visible bruises and marks protruding Aiko's back are on show. In reality, Mitsuko is abusive despite trying to sell water that purifies the soul, and Aiko has no one else to rely on to live with, as she does not remember her birth mother, and her father is ill and eventually abandons them. This horrendous living situation, having no real family and the one responsible for her, creates a dichotomy within Aiko that really is tragic to see develop. She wishes to escape more than anything, to vanish from the life she is part of unwillingly, to flutter away to Kagoshima, where she idealizes a perfect life. This is a childish ambition, however it is one that proceeds to remain in her mentality for her entire life, and it isn't helped that Punpun shares the exact same mindset. The first person she really confides in ends up warping her perceptions, and she believes it's a real goal they can achieve together. He agrees to escape with her, as his life is also drowned in domestic violence and unstable parents, but the issue that occurs as she grows is Mitsuko's damning manipulation, hounding it into her that she is too stupid, too inexperienced to live on her own, and mentally chains Aiko to her control. This alludes to classical Stockholm syndrome, in which the captive becomes tethered to the captor due to the psychological reasons persisting over a lengthy period, and Aiko is unable to escape by herself. The abuse she is shown to have experienced as early as chapter 10 is an indicator of the dark realism of the manga and why suffering in silence is so destructive. This develops her escapist obsession, and we see throughout the story, through her interactions with Punpun, that all she wishes to do is escape, eventually achieving that through a saddening conclusion, as the press of life eventually crushes her. Punpun follows her, and they finally commit to going far away together, Kagoshima, a place that sort of acts as the Vinland of Goodnight Punpun, a place where they can escape from the torments of the life they live and be happy together. Even if it is a childish dream, I'm sure most people envision escape of some sort through physical or mental conditions, so it makes sense for two children, victims of abuse, to also cry out for that saving grace. Aiko jokingly claims she will kill Punpun if he breaks this next promise, and it is here we see slight dashes to the innocent love they first experienced. Aiko interacts normally within group scenarios with kids around her age, including Punpun, when they infiltrate the abandoned factory, just happy to be close to him. The factory holds significant depth as well, with a multitude of events taking place here in the future and now, meeting Sachi, getting some of Seki's traumatic backstory, and visions of the future with the weirdly ambiguous supernatural element, an older Punpun appearing before the entire group on the roof of the building. Aiko misses the QuickTime event, leading to her head getting smashed with a massive pole, and we see young Punpun try his hardest to protect Aiko's unconscious body from older Punpun, which is just an insanely breathtaking moment in hindsight. Every reread has me needing to take moments just to really process how morbidly beautiful this writing is, and the doom signs from the very beginning that we didn't even realize. The future Punpun, who metaphorically tears Aiko to shreds due to the influence she had over him during their childhood, and as he grows up, and the younger Punpun, who is not yet corrupted by his own issues, trying to uphold his naive sense of duty and love for her. She cries from happiness when Punpun reawakens, and the crew, now having survived this traumatic experience of the fire, explosion, and spooky apparition, walk out under the Cosmos canvas, easily the most beautiful panel within the entire manga, as these children bound together through fate and intertwined through understanding, connected not only physically through their held hands, but the relatability of their past and trauma, follow the shooting star that was hope. If only the manga ended here, we could all be happy. The promise of escaping to Kagoshima is soon broken, however, as Punpun realizes how impossible to achieve it really is, pondering about how terrified of that responsibility he is as he and Yuichi rush to the hospital after being alerted of his mother falling from a fire escape. On the way there, Punpun feels a strange sense of relief that his mother fell, not even worried as Yuichi chatters away about the self-destructive tendencies of his mother, focusing on his fear of going with Aiko to Kagoshima. The taxi zooms past Aiko in a dramatic fashion, her tears cascading down her face and flying off when she comes to the realization he is not going with her like he had promised. It's quite the sad moment, as she was let down once again by the person she was fixated on, and this drives a very potent wedge between the two from that point on. It is unfair to put the blame onto Punpun, obviously. I don't think anyone can condemn such an impressionable child such as him to make baseless claims to appease the girl he's fawning over. However, this moment really does have consequences down the line, as each domino tips, leading to the final act. The process of Punpun's development from victim to perpetrator, blameless to blameful, is one of careful execution from Asano, who meticulously details every traumatic event in his life, showing us how living environments can create monsters, and Aiko is the main victim of Punpun's eventual fall to complete sadism. But for now, we feel sympathy for both him and Aiko, and Punpun has a terrible summer dreading Aiko's reaction and wallowing in his own self-loathing. Poor guy. On the return to school, she is cold to him, clearly still hurt from Punpun's broken promise, and remains distant for the rest of primary. They have a conversation that echoes their original one, Aiko ahead talking back at him. However, this time her face is not shown and there is no warmth. Aiko is someone who often hides behind a facade of content, whilst being a saddened wreck inside, and this is evident from her explosive goodbye to her friend, the sudden drop while speaking to Punpun, and continues throughout all her life with fake smiles and pain-filled laughs. We have a 2-year time skip, and noticeable growth for Aiko has proceeded since, leaving Punpun in the dust, meeting an older boy and dating him during middle school, much to the utter destruction of Punpun's world. Punpun has become so infatuated with Aiko that he believed they were destined to die with each other, and seeing her so obviously disregard the memory of him with another boy creates a reasonable reaction given the circumstances, a valid crash out as they say. Punpun and Yaguchi enter a rivalry of sorts in which Punpun's violent intrusive thoughts for Yaguchi are challenged by Yaguchi's genuinely kind personality, and the mental gymnastics Punpun conducts are truly hopeless, trying to convince himself that his importance to Aiko is significantly more than it really is at the time. They pass each other after a conflict between Aiko and Yaguchi, and Punpun is left shattered as Aiko once again completely ignores him. However, it is revealed that the cause of her tears was Punpun himself, and it is made clear to us that despite Aiko's ignorance of Punpun, her emotions for him have not changed fully. He is the one she wants to risk it all with, her obsession with his promise, everything remains deep within her, she just wishes to bury it, to give up hoping. The two dudes have some weird shonen standoff in which the prize is protecting and loving Aiko, cause yeah, she's a commodity to be challenged over from men I guess, but whatever, they are still just kids. During the climactic clash between the psychotic Kamatsu and the cool-headed Yaguchi, Punpun and Aiko watch from the upper stand, and Aiko finally speaks to Punpun about her feelings. Aiko presents the idea that if you are not willing to throw everything you have away for someone, to disappear and fuse completely with that person, if you have a loving family to fall back on, if you are not desperate to find meaning with a single person in a world full of useless hiding spots, then it is not love. Aiko admits how Yaguchi is really an outstanding guy, but despite that, she does not feel able to love him completely, as his goals lie outside of just her. She desires, wishes, and needs someone to only see her, as without that she feels a guarantee to be left in the dust once more. It is an interesting way of thinking about love, mixed with unhealthy dips of obsession and selfishness. In my opinion, Aiko knows nothing of what a healthy loving relationship is, which is why her feelings towards it have become so convoluted. There is nothing wrong with devoting your loyalty and emotional feelings towards a single person. That much is to be expected within a loving relationship. However, the issue is giving everything else up, your previous life, your own personal wishes, your family, and all that you have built in your life for a single person. It is not healthy, not practical, and seems to me, as it ends with Punpun and Aiko, ingredients for damnation of the soul. These aspects should all be held with equal balance to avoid getting sucked up into someone else's existence and losing yourself. Never ever lose yourself for someone else's happiness. That would be my advice as someone with 7 kids and 4 divorces. Loads of people hate on Aiko during this time and throughout the entire manga, mind you, without any prior knowledge to the struggles of her life, such as the abuse and abandonment, and in truth it's not her fault, yet we can still feel immense sympathy for Yaguchi, who is going to suffer the brunt of her choosing Punpun, which is clear as day from the hand-holding in which the chapter ends with. Aiko, like Punpun, is a product of her environment, as many children turn out to be in real life, suffering from their suffering of their forebearers. And Goodnight Punpun certainly promotes this cyclical structure of pain and broken love. It raises questions about what path we should choose, how to be happy or content despite occupying hell, to fight or indulge our deepest desires, or to take the full force of the universe and die a meaningless entity. Aiko forgives Punpun for breaking his promise, but in a rare moment of self-respect, Punpun rejects Aiko's warm hand, never to see each other again. Till the very next date, bum 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 ba-da-dum. Another time skip occurs with Aiko's presence minimal, mainly flashing across Punpun's mind in times of deep reflection and despair, and if you have read the manga, you know the horrific experiences Punpun himself has during this time with Midori, to name one of them, but I won't go into them as this is about Aiko more, but we must always remember Punpun himself is also a victim. However, as the story progresses, Aiko herself as a character does regress into more of a memory than a person. She is the curse and blessing on Punpun's mind, always. Despite him entering his new relationships, new aspects of life, Aiko is the one constant, the remaining desire he had as a kid, and he can never get over her. This memory of her and their past together causes her to warp in his mind, crafting her to be the key to all his eternal happiness that is locked away. The monotonous slug of Punpun's life is really felt around this time until one glorious moment, one moment that sets ablaze the withering soul within him, and of course, like everything else, it was and always has been Aiko. Spotting her from outside the train he was on gets his mind racing with thriving possibilities and decides to lock in and hunt her down. With a nothing to lose, everything to gain mentality, Punpun's life is re-sparked, only for a little bit though, as eventually the classic spiraling occurs as his resolve wavers in finding her. The dream and hallucination of Aiko returns to Punpun, and we see some unsettling foreshadowing of their eventual climax in the story, with Aiko presented in her child self. It is important to note that Punpun will often refer to Aiko's young self as the true Aiko, as this was the one he loved most, and her growth and experience after made her inadequate to the Aiko he knew but did not accept was now gone. He can't validate himself, so he is hoping Aiko will be his salvation. It is pathetic and crippling to Aiko herself as she is tethered to this insane expectation, and other characters such as Sachi, who is left to clean up the nuclear wasteland of a mess that is Punpun on Adira. The only issue is Punpun serves the very same role for Aiko, funnily enough, making them both pathetic and doomed individuals in this tragic romance. Is that a harsh way of putting it? Oh well, I don't care. We learn Aiko has entered the modelling life whilst being 19 as she is spotted by Seki and Shimizu in a magazine after they bump into each other coincidentally. It is clear Aiko is depressed, a deadpanned face present while speaking to them, wasting no time and dismissing them, claiming they got the wrong person. Despite going through quite the traumatic event as children, which bound them together, this shows that Aiko cares little for anyone else, secluded within herself, trapped like Punpun in the monotony of her life. Regardless of achieving the goals she highlighted while speaking with Punpun that very first time, obviously other issues are at play, meaning she is not happy nor content with her position in the slightest. She must continue plastering this counterfeit personality in her professional career, a fake smile that looks as superficial as possible and wastes no time with niceties whilst out in public, even with people she used to know. Following their chance encounter in chapter 99, the climax between Punpun and Aiko enters its most brutal, most emotionally captivating, devastatingly somber and pessimistic state, and for me the hardest part of the entire manga to get through whilst remaining stable, which is a possible reason why this video has taken so long to come out. A flurry of emotion and all positive character growth for Punpun, admittedly not much, is flung out of the window as Aiko, the reoccurring nightmare and love of his life, enters the frame once more. She asks Punpun if he remembers her, which to the audience is absolutely hilarious considering how there has not been a day in which Punpun's life has not consisted of fantasizing about her. But interestingly enough, past the surface level, I guess Punpun doesn't remember her. As children, Aiko represented the pinnacle of freedom and childhood innocence for Punpun, yet Aiko as a person has always been broken, abused and in pain. I don't think Punpun ever truly understood Aiko, even when she presents her vulnerabilities, and alongside Punpun's own cynicism and hatred towards the world, causes his own idealization of her to crash down and turn violent as his last hope shattered. Initially, however, Aiko appears happy, once again hiding behind that facade she created to shield herself from the unhelping world, as she constantly faces isolation and lack of support from others, including her abusive family and toxic relationship later on with Punpun. Despite her claiming she achieved her dream as a model, the cracks of despair can be seen on her face. Like Seki said, she is a terrible fake smiler, but for now we remain slightly hopeful that her life has gotten better since a child, and Punpun remains hopeful as well. They begin meeting more regularly, Aiko revealing facts about her life that later on she admits to being lies, to make her life appear more colourful, that suggests she is just your average young adult, nothing too incredulous and nothing too amiss. After seeing what becomes of the two, these meetups feel so contrived, so false and superficial, it is somewhat challenging to get through, as Asano paints the picture of how model citizens are meant to behave when communicating with others, hiding that deep trauma and pain within, and smiling blindly to basic conversation. But this is not enough for Punpun, who can't accept the current Aiko, the one who is attempting to live like any other person in a world that tries to drown us constantly, to be the same person as the goddess Forcia she was built up to be in his delusional mind. Aiko says it feels like her and Punpun are adults now, but this begs the question of what adulthood is. Is it being happy overall? Is happiness even attainable for extended periods or just fleeting moments? Is it being well adjusted to real life in terms of being flat pressed into how the world wishes you to be? Is it accepting the death of your innocent dreams, or even achieving the goals of what you aspired to be as a child? Maybe it's as simple as age, and I feel like both Aiko and Punpun are just more experienced than when they first met in terms of suppressing pain and emotion and getting on with their life. Aiko hides it very well, however we can't see Punpun's facial features, only the vibes that he himself feels, which makes it difficult to read him sometimes. Aiko reminisces on her past and childhood experiences, laughing about how silly she often was in terms of her expectations and desire to escape. Once again, my interpretation of this part of the manga is simply Aiko has suppressed these emotions deeper than when she was a child, yet Punpun acts as the reviving stimulant to bring them all eventually back to the surface, alongside all the terrible pain associated with that. The reason Punpun is so disgusted by Aiko here is he cannot fathom how Aiko has seemingly moved on past her childhood and attached herself to new desires, uncaring to how she sucked Punpun into the void, and outlines his childish personality and hopeless desires that he has kindled since a very young age, unable to let them go, turning his attitude foul. The two book a hotel, Aiko now showing a more saddened face, lost of all that joy she put on earlier, as Punpun degrades her for alleged promiscuity and perhaps even a show of the Madonna whore complex proposed by Freud. Now that Aiko is dirty and unrespectable to Punpun, he will sexualize her, ruin her by taking control of the situation, of her body, and use her like an object. Gone are the niceties of romantic love, and welcome are the degenerate thoughts Punpun revels in. Even though he knows he is the selfish one, he cares little for her opinion, and attempts to have sex with her anyways. Aiko laments about her situation, accusing Punpun of living such a cushy life, and flees the demon like a fizzling spark before he can ruin her completely. This series of meetings between the two highlight two major things. Aiko is still miserable despite her facade of happiness, and 2. Punpun is the main way to unlock her despair, effortlessly depressing her spirit and cancelling out the lies she spoke to make herself seem like an achieved person. In truth, Aiko has been stuck as well in the past, idealizing her dream escape with Punpun, unable to let the childhood memories vanish forever, recalling the time she promised she'd kill him if he ever lied again. But now the two live in constant lies to themselves and the world, making understanding of the soul impossible, let alone others, and Aiko's eyes are drawn with such husk-like emptiness. Something I always noticed was Asano's proficiency at detailing eyes when it comes to conveying emotion, and this dull nature is seen within Aiko's. She claims she has been waiting for him all this time, despite lying initially, expresses how she could naturally smile whilst being around Punpun again. As it is the entire motif throughout the manga, the idea of unhealthy obsession, creating a savior from a lack of stability purely as a way to escape the abusive reality is at show, and a slightly harrowing parallel is made between the two as they rest next to each other. The contrast between now and when they were children, a much brighter, more vibrant conversation, to now dark, shattered visages and lack of fulfillment. Aiko hints at her stepmother's vituperative tendencies, belittling her dreams of being a model, and her strict curfew that suffocates Aiko to the point of exhaustion. The two share a kiss also reminiscent of their childhood, and Aiko's face is portrayed to be tragically sad, yet sweating, even excited, a heart racing at the connection they are reforming. I consider their relationship to be similar to this. You are dying from a wound, and in order to survive you must drink a potion to provide temporary boosts of health, yet it simultaneously drives you to self-destruction, only extending your suffering and eventually killing you regardless. I hope that makes some coherent sense. Aiko begins falling for this fake version of Punpun, as if he was still some mild-mannered child with no anger nor spite, believing he hasn't changed one bit, showing her optimism far outreaches Punpun's own, as the death of the optimist within him occurred years ago at this point. Or maybe she is just stupid, like Punpun thinks. Finally, we get more of her family dynamic within chapter 108, docile to her stepmother's insane delusions, which is something that has been beaten literally and emotionally into her existence her entire life, which ultimately leaves her trapped to her stepmother's whims. She is also drawn with a bruised eye, obviously implying her mother beat her for coming back so late. She does not fight, just accepts, silent in her suffering. The obsessive nature of her mother with Cosmo health products and false idols undermines her reliability as a caretaker, and we know this has been a common crime within Aiko's domestic life ever since young childhood, and during the formative years of the brain this can really mess up someone's perception of reality, which Aiko is a victim of. Her working life is no different, facing sexual harassment and neglected as a real part of society by the men of the workforce who ask vulgar and dehumanizing things such as the number of dicks she sucked, implying she is seen as a whore due to her line of work prior being modeling. Just like at home, she is submissive and unresponsive to insults hurled her way, eyes drawn devoid of happiness, often staring at the ground as she bottles it all up inside, rejecting the friendly attempts of the new employee to bring equality in her treatment. This panel in particular really just evokes that lack of identity within Aiko for me. The way Asano draws the colourless and tired expression really exhibits her exhaustion, and the viewers of this video still here having to listen to whatever this ramble-structured script has become. We do see Aiko put up some meagre attempt of resistance to her stepmother when she returns, telling, begging, calling out for a better life, and pointing at the obvious lunacy of the Cosmos Health Center in what they promote when the very fundamental aspects of their domestic situation is ripped from the dunnest smokes of hell itself. She goes to sleep that night with fresh wounds, sniffing and shaking, whilst in a fetal position that has obvious connotations to the state of vulnerability, social withdrawal, shyness, and overall a delicate soul, which writers and mangakas often use to evoke in a show not tell method. This can be seen in the manga Homunculus, with Nakoshi always drawn to sleep in this position, as he is also a fractured and lost soul. What comes next is yet another changing point in the relationship between Aiko and Punpun, as that barrier Aiko once rejected is broken down, either from despair in her life, looking for any pleasure she possibly can, or to spark a connection with the one person she believes can still save her, and the two have some incredibly passionate sex, with splendidly charged narration to really emphasize how monumental this new experience was for the two, with lust and animalistic brutality depicted in a wild state like a red splattered canvas. The very notion of restraint being blown away by the feelings, Punpun sinking in the abyss of pleasure, and Aiko remembering she is simply just a human girl. No less, no more. I'm not sure if Aiko was just caught up in the moment or truly wanted Punpun to finish inside her, yet she calls out for him to come inside, maybe even planning to baby trap him in a hopeful effort to keep him forever bound by a child. This is, needless to say, a horrendously unhealthy thought process to have, spawned from fear and prior neglect, but also purely selfish from Aiko, as she or Punpun neither have the funds or means, mentally or physically, to prosper with a family and a child, and would most likely cause the cycle of abuse to return again. Punpun does not finish in her, and the crashing of the climax occurs instantly, with the two once again drawn to be disheveled husks, sinking in their loneliness, despite the intense pleasure just shown. Punpun thinks he is barely above hell, but the aftercare conversation actually holds a more hopeful feeling, as Aiko manages to really discuss her issues for once, opening up about her discontent with current life. Also, check out his little Punpun wiener. And the promise once thought decayed and dead is sparked up once more, with Punpun committing to an escape from their life and to go somewhere far away. A tale for these two as old as time. Planet Punpun, Kagoshima, it does not matter, just anywhere but this hellscape in which they are burnt daily. Aiko's face becomes almost childlike again hearing the words, a genuine looking smile plastered across her face, the marks on her back that almost resemble burns as potent as ever. When reading, I often hear a musical beat in the background, sort of like a soundtrack that increases in tempo and volume during the climactic scenes, and as the two drive to Aiko's house for their final challenge before escape, this beat begins throbbing with intensity, Aiko uttering her need for Punpun's love. They are slowly merging into what they were as children, blindly believing the other is the answer and escape is necessary. However, the issue comes from the fact they are now in the real world, and their dreams will not translate positively as we are about to see. Punpun reverts back to that one moment where Aiko waited for him all those years ago, and we see a guts I'll never lose her again moment, stripped of all the heroism and inspiration of that berserk scene, much more futilely proclaimed, more to save himself rather than her. The final panel of volume 10 is daunting, a black background with a simple proclamation. Everything was for this moment. All acts of realistic horror, abuse, tears, broken promises, struggle, suffering, lies, deception, delusion, and hope all rode on this one moment to finally break free from the prison of their lives. One last obstacle. Aiko lists the things she wants in life, painting an average existence and saying she'd be fine with whatever the circumstances as long as Punpun was a part of it, and this really forces a tragic thought in the reader's head as she is not aware of the demon Punpun truly is. He will destroy everything from his own self-serving hatred of the world from which even Aiko is not safe from. Even as they share this moment from which Aiko's perspective is wholesome, the narration of Punpun is diabolically sadistic, fantasizing about mauling her and killing her whilst touching her up. Gone is the boy who wished to bring her the world from within himself as well. Here is the man who only plays that caring role to please her. Most likely not intentional, however the fact Aiko's sclera, the usually white part of the eye, is still wounded gives a vibe that part of her view is skewered to reality and Punpun himself. She can still see, it is just distorted from her injuries which go far deeper than the eye wound. The phrase rose-tinted glasses comes to mind, just in a much more violent way. Aiko has been beaten to the point she cannot even see correctly, unknowing of what she wants or who she is, holding on to a thread of hope. They enter her home to see Aiko's stepmom dressed in her old school clothes with a recorder and a headset. The implication is kind of obvious, I think, don't massacre me if I'm wrong, but she is either streaming herself on pornographic sites or something of the like, sexualizing herself with Aiko's old clothes, as the schoolgirl fantasies are rife within society. Her stepmom sidesteps the question and Aiko announces her plans to leave for good. Her stepmom plays victim, all whilst drawn with a dark face, attempting to emotionally manipulate her. However, either Aiko overcomes that manipulation or simply has given up caring about her words, remaining absolute in her resolve to leave. She is tired and has to go. Her stepmom feigns composure, eloquently engaging with Aiko in a condescending way that belittles her ability to cope on her own, bringing up her failures and lack of independence throughout her life, in a mild way almost politely spitting upon her existence, until the facade slips and she resorts to physical abuse to Aiko when words fail, screaming profanities at her, trying to demolish any sliver of confidence Aiko might have. I want you to think of the person you love most in terms of parental guardian. Imagine them saying these things, hitting you, trapping you for years and years on end with complete seriousness. I'm sure it makes you feel uncomfortable, broken perhaps, disgusted even. Many may even relate to that. This story is hyper-realistic in terms of its domestic issues after all. So when Aiko gets hate for her odd words, strange phrases and actions, I can only feel sympathy for her. She is a shattered visage, as Shelley would say, and her story is ever so tragic. Despite Aiko's valid question about believing in a cultist regime, her stepmother once again manipulates the narrative, trying to choke Aiko with her own guilt. When that doesn't work, the good old-fashioned method of
brutally murdering your daughter in cold blood with a knife
is the chosen option and manages to fatally wound a traumatized Aiko in the side despite her meek pleading. It is such a chaotically composed scene, with Punpun awakening something deep and feral inside, Aiko regressing to her weak and apologetic state, and the stepmom cast with a grotesque face of insanity. Punpun takes the initiative, battering the stepmom, letting all his pent-up rage out, blood spattering and screams screeching, and Asano decides to hit us in the emotional balls again by showing a picture of Aiko and her stepmom much younger, with the person holding Aiko cut out. She remains in the corner, gripping her wound, frozen in fear at the unfolding nightmare as her savior massacres her previous stability, two worlds colliding in the most traumatic way possible. She could be having a panic attack, but she also did get stabbed, so her entire system is most likely overstimulated. Aiko remains in her locked position for quite some time as Punpun adjusts and washes up, even interacting with the delivery man, but when he returns we see her stabbing her stepmother. This later is revealed to be much more significant, as Aiko says her stepmother was actually still alive, meaning she had to be the one to vanquish her, which is a very shivering revelation, but for now we believe she is simply letting out frustration in attempts to receive some catharsis from revenge. Asano, being the perfect writer he is, wraps it all up with a tragicomic joke that the item her stepmother bought was a vibrator, and Aiko cracks, laughing at the stupidity of it all. She was leashed to her mother's degenerate ways as she wasted the money Aiko tirelessly grafted for. Her laughter is quite maniac, Joker-esque even, gripping Punpun desperately with blood plastered all over her. So yeah, this is clearly spiraled out of control, and Punpun and Aiko are now forced to cover up the death of her stepmother. Aiko is never quite as mentally focused after this event, which is natural as she suffers a significant blood loss and viewing of Ultraviolence. She dozes off and has a dream of being in school, specifically struggling, which from my experience is a common thing, as for some reason the concept of school can have negative long-lasting effects. She has this dream multiple times with different questions being asked, and ties in with Aiko's feelings of inadequacy in any field she pursues, unable to answer the questions she is asked, which can also translate to her real-life situation where she has no answers for her identity or purpose. She is such a layered character, and I absolutely love analysing her, no matter the pain it causes me. They bury the body in a foresty area after wrapping it up, Aiko standing absent-mindedly, clearly suffering still, just holding the torchlight in the ominous darkness of the trees. This being in front of her, called Punpun, operates almost mechanically without hesitation, a far cry from the timid mess he was for so much of his life. He gives options to Aiko for how to proceed, going on lengthy theories to save her from incarceration, as he believes he killed Aiko's stepmother and therefore should harbour the guilt. I don't fully know if Punpun actually intended on following through with these sentiments, or more so he's simply giving her false assurances, which have been part of his character anyways, and exits the car as if to go on the run by himself, leaving Aiko behind. However, I think he absolutely knew she'd fling herself after him. In her state, she is the most helpless she has ever been, the wounds stinting her movement and cognitive ability, along with the sudden change in livelihood. This panel is so sad as her head tilts, tears tumbling down, just looking like a mess. Even Punpun, the one who supposedly saved her, walks away and gets Aiko to fall to his dominant power, his overbearing white knight complex, and he laughs like an edgy villain as the rain falls around them. These chapters are very challenging to get through, at least that is what I feel like, and can really grind down your mood. Aiko drops some lore about her father, who left when she was very young, the detrimental effects of your father figure leaving your life needless to go into, and isolated her more from people she can rely upon. I'm not sure what prompted her to explain her family situation, but this retrospective glance back explains more about her psychology and the fear of abandonment, being left with monsters who lick away at her mental health. Punpun goes on a rant about humanity in an incredibly similar way to his uncle, wrought with pessimistic disgust with the tenebrosity of human nature, spilling paragraphs about how he believes chaos to expel evil is a necessity, such as he did to Aiko's stepmother. Aiko, being the now disconnected person she is, fails to comprehend his words, only hoping he does not leave her. Once again, she has a nightmare about her past school life and ends up wetting the bed, but there is a much darker moment about to occur. Originally, I did not know what set Aiko off. I thought it was just a sudden physical pain. However, from research online, it seems the accepted cause is a panic attack after she deeply thinks about how they actually murdered someone. Aiko knowing she was the one to deal the killing blow as well, and this causes her to freak out, screaming and falling. Punpun reacts quickly and rashly, grabbing her violently and trying to silence her by covering her face. You know, the things you should never do to someone having a panic attack. Aggressive and shocking movements obviously do not help settle a person, and Aiko panics even more, gnawing on Punpun's finger to try and escape, which causes him to savagely smash her in the face with his fist. And so, the most haunting parallel in the entire manga for me is finally achieved, with Aiko losing a tooth, specifically the same one she was missing when Punpun first met her, dragging her back to Punpun's evil fantasy as he attempts to control and mold her completely to become the idealized perfect version he saw all those years ago. Unfortunately, this is impossible. He recalls the promise that broke everything and asks her to go to Kagoshima with him, the paradise the two have sought after for so long, but later on Aiko finally questions whether Punpun is still the same person she met that time before. Like, no, he is not the same person and neither are you, but she is too mentally and physically ill to maintain that thought process and is coerced into sleep. The reminiscing of their childhood, of the lost innocence and hopeful futures is a significant part of the climax, Aiko remembering the most beautiful panel of the entire manga, in my opinion, and it allows us as readers to reflect upon everything that has occurred since, how the difference in relationships has caused these monsters and lost souls to form, from the blameless children to murderers on the run. Just a tragic scenario that continues to stain with blood. Their days are spent in complexity and nonsensical interactions. Aiko, who definitely has some form of borderline personality disorder, either shown to be a husk or smiling and joking around, and creates a very unsettling atmosphere for the reader as we are seeing the plot unfold from Punpun's twisted perspective, and I was despising him by now for the things he thinks and does to Aiko. But they seem to spend a somewhat pleasant time together, exploring the different sights of the places they are travelling through, Aiko smiling often, which is refreshing to see for sure, but underneath we know she is in immense pain. After a somewhat sophisticated conversation about how they should proceed in remaining undercover to avoid police and suspicion, this is instantly contrasted by Aiko calmly suggesting she gouges out one of Punpun's eyes to remain loyal to her, to know she can always trust him. The part that shocks me the most is how peacefully she suggests it, as if she was asking to take out the dog for a walk or the trash because it's bin day tomorrow. Something so mundane, but no, she is talking about mauling him with a metal object in a public space. I've mentioned it so much that to say it again is banal by now, but once again we are shown these mentally deranged people leeching off of each other to fuel their delusions, as anyone with a stable thought process knows this would never create a more trusting bond between two people. Punpun, being the freakster he is, agrees to her proposition, but she fails initially to take his entire eye out, and he calls her a disappointing, stupid biatch. She struggles so much as she really believes she loves him, still holding on to that false belief, and Punpun flips out, drawing attention to him from citizens as he calls out for her to be more serious about their messed up relationship. The next time we see them, they are getting hot in a disabled public toilet because the best way to deal with conflict has always been sex, yeah. They slowly move through life, exchanging depressing conversations of the things forgotten. Interestingly enough, Aiko claims she hardly remembers anything from their middle school days, which serves to undermine their relationship even further, as it practically confirms the hazy memory of the past has distorted her view on things such as Punpun, and now she is trapped with only his current self to rely on. I also feel as if she's lying slightly, as she clearly remembered the abandoned factory night, but also says she doesn't recall any of those classmates. Another thing to mention is the conversations, implications, deeper meanings, and emotions of this section in the manga is very, very up for interpretation. There is more ambiguity between Aiko and Punpun in this part up to chapter 139 than any other, which leads to multiple understandings of the text. I am simply giving mine in this video. Punpun also exhibits self-loathing, which is consistent with his newfound philosophy towards the world in believing there is not a single good or redeeming person out there. This includes himself, and a lot of his actions are taken in order to punish either his naivety in allowing Aiko to ruin him, or just his general attitude towards everything. He hates himself and wants to die as well, and often moves suicidally, such as agreeing with Aiko to take his eye out, ordering her to strangle him, or stabbing himself much later on. The tension of their hometown increases as police begin investigating the disappearance of Aiko's stepmother, but Punpun keeps spouting his nonsense, feeling faster and stronger than ever before, even thanking Aiko for driving him into despair. He often makes these psychologically damaging comments towards her, which over time do whittle her down, I believe, her eyes indicating how tired she is of this entire ordeal. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I have been centrally focusing on the Aiko aspect of the story, but there are multiple other storylines I'm not going over, such as the Pegasus, Seki, Yuichi, Sachi plots, but this video is mainly focused on Aiko, so don't consider it a full accounting of the manga. Aiko begins her rap career well, dropping some proverbial fire, a nursery rhyme written by Samuel Pepys that basically encourages people to take joy in the smaller things, spend frugally, and do not lust for things much larger than you can manage. A wholesome rhyme that alludes to her childlike whimsy and overall innocence in the life she has been thrown into. That childlike whimsy is stripped from her quickly though by Punpun as she harmlessly doodles away on her Tanabata wish, which is a custom partaken in the festival of Tanabata, where one jots down a happy little wish and hangs it on some bamboo. It is mainly done by children, something Asano explicitly shows us, relating to how Aiko is still unaccepting of reality and wishes to be content in the future. But Punpun, being the pessimistic demon he is, rips her away from the stupid little activity as he labels it, causing her to scream and bawl out in despair, gaining a lot of attention as he drags her across the floor like a spoiled child who wants her own way. It just builds the disgust we hold for Punpun, who does not even treat Aiko like a person most of the time, just an accessory to his black hole of destruction. Yet, as she is so attached to him, she remains loving and caring of his issues, concerned about his back, his sleep, and focused on getting to Kagoshima. She is holding on unknowingly as Punpun is searching for suicide methods. After stopping Punpun from beating a guy to death, she compares him to her stepmother as he blatantly lies and tries to manipulate Aiko in how to perceive the world, and it's very true indeed. Aiko's stepmother was a monster, and a bigger monster came and took Aiko away. They are the same in how they try to control and suppress her with their own will. They arrive in Kagoshima, the long-dreamt escape for the two, in the most underwhelming, unsatisfying, meh way possible. The pair, drained and hurt, made me recall the time Aiko said as long as she has Punpun, she cares not for anyone or anything else as kids, and flashing back to now, everything is just a broken dream. It is simply another city, not this utopian land where all their problems would vanish, relating to the running motif of the story that the build-up of one's dreams and ambitions in an unhealthy way can lead to unrealistic expectations that sting even more when you come face to face with failure. They board a ship sailing for the island of Tanegashima, which is in the Kagoshima prefecture, Aiko pondering how fate and destiny is conceived in life, with the tiniest choices or actions deeply affecting the distant future. But it is shut down by her psychotic captor. Whilst on the seashore, Punpun says she is as cute as a button, which would be a wholesome and cute thing if, it wasn't Punpun saying it. The scenery is beautiful, and Aiko attempts to regain some positive thinking by fantasizing about the peaceful, conflict-lacking future they could share together on the island. As always, she is jumping leaps and bounds to climb over the issues of her present, which is a common thing people do to separate themselves with the surroundings and influences of their life. Some beautifully tragic double spread panels follow, with Aiko, like a kid experiencing the sea for the first time, jumps and dances around, lost in the allure of it all, and may be the saddest collection of panels in the manga for me personally. She looks somewhat crazy but also happy in the most utterly depressive way possible. The dynamic between them often reminds me of the poem She Walks in Beauty, written by Lord Byron. Whilst the poem on the surface may seem to be a love poem written to admire a woman, there are certainly darker undertones of obsessive creepiness. Aiko is that nameless grace who is innocent and pure, and Punpun, mainly when he was younger, is the narrator watching her, idealizing her love, never truly understanding her, always from a distance that dilutes his expectations for Aiko, just like the narrator who knows nothing, even the name of the woman he watches, who suffers mischaracterization as a result. In classic Goodnight Punpun fashion, this tender scene is followed by a scene of madness, Punpun tightening a rope around Aiko, calmly confirming she was to die here. She first tries to quell his aggression by sex, but after he rejects that, she finally admits she was the one to deal the killing blow to her stepmother. Aiko is a killer, not Punpun. By technical terms, sure, but by every other consideration, morally, responsibility, ethically, it is the reverse. He doesn't believe her, but doesn't kill her, and once again the tension cools. The two are clearly at their limit, Punpun even saying it, and move like a ticking time bomb across the grass in which they leave scorched with agony. I love this panel, which admittedly reminded me of the Berserk Starry Night after the eclipse, which also had a shattering feeling of futility, as Aiko wishes everything else would vanish to dust, a tale of running from reality. She has a brief charge of joy, crying out from pure elation when a possible job opening in an agricultural sector comes up, which is swiftly blown away by the announcement on the news that her stepmother has been located and being treated as a murder case, with Aiko Tanaka as a primary suspect, and the forces have begun searching, with evidence already tightening the search to the Kagoshima prefecture due to the pair's action in stealing her stepmother's car. The twist closes off the penultimate volume of the manga, and we enter the final one with dread heavy in our heart and panic for our protagonist kicking in once more. The information somewhat stunts Aiko, and she is barely responsive to a superfan who approaches her asking for an autograph, and intrigue to her career from her modelling days. Punpun tells him to get lost, and also tells Aiko despite the fact she found a temporary solution, they can no longer stay on the island. Life on the run stories rarely ever end in successful escape, and even on the odd chance they do, there are significant detriments to a person's sociability, breakdown of relations, and uneasiness forevermore, so we aren't filled with much hope for Aiko's safety. On top of this, her physical state is deteriorating, passing out and smacking the pavement as her back flares up, and we can see the injury is really not healing, looking like it is slowly rotting away at her body. Later on, they discuss the plausibility of her uncle being a trustworthy person, Aiko's hope being drowned by Punpun's doubt as usual, and they flee the taxi driver's car after suspecting he caught on to their identities. Aiko's paranoia and psychosis is worsening with each step they take, and surrounded by the inky darkness of the forest, she assumes Punpun is planning on killing her and dumping her body due to his name not being listed in the search. It is nice to see Aiko finally accuse Punpun of things and how it's turned out, but it really is too late for blame. They are bound together by their assumed crimes and messed up loyalty, and Punpun allows her to run the blade she brandishes against him to penetrate his body. Just like Guts when Casca is venting against him in a sense, just electrified tenfold with malice, spite, lust, greed, desire, hatred, and pain, until you get a vomit-inducing relationship in an unsettlingly realistic scenario. Tears and snot pour from her sockets and nose, with her eyes looking distant and dreary, as Punpun lectures her on how safe she is thanks to being in his grasp. He thinks they will be able to completely understand each other soon enough, and the sorrowful scene is settled with the soft pants and heaves of fornication. They arrive at her uncle's town to find it a dead, abandoned place, many of the businesses and people relocated to the nearby city where it would be more financially viable to survive. They wander aimlessly through this ghost town, picking up a sun hat, and I must say Aiko still looks beautiful. Even in her weakened and drained state, she remains looking as pretty as ever, even more perhaps due to the compelling attachment the reader has to her suffering and broken dreams. She also acknowledges that she is not able to live up to the expected girl. Punpun had created of her, which of course is not her fault. There is not a single entity that would withstand what Punpun obsessed over, in what he believed he deserved, and this is one of the main reasons why I've always considered her character to be more tragic than Punpun's, as he actively consumes her and she does not fight back, only suffers the countless blows, shattered promises, and lack of desired love. When they watched the stars shoot over the factory, Aiko wished for her and Punpun to fall in love, and believes her wish came true. This is pure delusion, of course, seeing the world still through those rose-tinted glasses, or maybe she is simply lying to herself in a hope she might one day believe it, as whatever they have is not love, just an amalgamation of want. Yet she slowly drifts off to sleep on Punpun's shoulder in the shady breeze of the quiet town, thinking thoughts of tranquility surrounding her lover. On July 1st, 2 p.m, Punpun Onodera finds Aiko Tanaka hanging. Cause of death, suicide. There are countless avenues to explore what drove her final decision to end it all: her guilt for killing her stepmother and roping Punpun into it, inability to escape years of suffering despite changing her physical location, that dream of Kagoshima not gifting her asylum, realization that she and Punpun were not right for each other and only destroyed the other, and so on and so forth. She was marked for death from many chapters ago, and even though we saw it coming, the way Asano paints the unfolding scenes and those following is so heartbreaking, and I absolutely bawled my eyes out, I'll admit it. This story that began so innocently packaged, slowly corrupted by the outside world, abusive influence, inner spite, which twisted and scarred the relationship of Aiko and Punpun until Aiko broke and her wisps of belief finally expired. Her Tanabata wish was for Punpun to never forget her, and anytime I see this melancholic yearning, the stomach twist I experience has got to be akin to the pain of giving birth. Bravo Asano, you wonderfully destructive man. Now, this video is long enough as it is, a script over 10,000 words, so if you are still watching, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Any extra support would be incredibly appreciated, as this video took so long to make, so thank you. But for now, go, seek freedom, my wild fledglings. Be not violent with those you claim to love, harbour no malice for those under your care, incite no conflict within yourself or others. Be as open to loving as Aiko, but not the slightest bit as naive. Until the next one, peace out.